remember the smell of it first. The air aboard the Vengeful Spirit was not the sterile, recycled atmosphere they boast of in the Imperial data slates. It was ozone from power conduits, the oil of sacred machinery, the faint coppery tang of aggression seeping from the pores of the Legiones Astartes themselves. It was the smell of purpose, of inevitability. The Luna Wolves, the tip of the Emperor's spear, and the galaxy was our bleeding wound. I was not a warrior. My hands have never held a bolter, only a stylus and a pipter. I was a remembrancer, a chronicler of this great crusade, a glorious, bloody reunification of mankind. They called us artists, poets, scribes of a new golden age. We were fools, the Emperor's vultures, sent to pick the bones of conquered worlds and arrange them into pretty, palatable monuments. My name is Siren Valerius, and I was there when the gold began to rust from the inside out. My first audience with the Warmaster is a scar upon my soul. It was not a grand heroic moment, but a transaction. Brought before him on the command deck, a speck of dust in the cathedral of his ambition. He was a giant in white and green ceramite, a gravitational force. Like bent toward him, every soul orbited his presence. He was Horus Lupercal, perfect and terrifying. He looked at me, not through me. His eyes were chips of obsidian, calculation stripping me bare. Siren Valerius, his voice was the grinding of continental plates, vibrating in my bones. You will document our crusade. You will show the Imperium the face of its future. I bowed, heart a frantic bird in a cage of ribs. I live to serve my Lord Warmaster. I will record the truth. A smile touched his lips, cold and precise. Truth is a weapon, little chronicler. See that you wield it well. The words were poison, slow-acting and insidious. I thought he spoke of accuracy, of honor, not of my own damnation. For years I wielded my truth. I documented compliances, worlds burned in atomic fire, cultures kneeling through whispered diplomacy. My official logs were hints to the imperial truth, but I kept another record, a private journal for things that did not fit the glorious narrative. The look in a Xenos child's eyes before an Astartes ended it. The quiet despair of a culture being erased. The inhuman strength of the warriors I traveled with. This secret heresy would become the only thing of value I ever produced. The change did not come with a thunderclap. It seeped, a stain after Davin. Official record says the Warmaster was wounded by a tainted blade, a minor injury. I was not on the surface, but I was there when they brought him back. The Medicaid deck smelled of psychic chill, lights flickered, servitors stuttered. For 3 solar days, the spirit was a ghost ship holding its breath. The Luna Wolves moved like haunted men. Their certainty vanished, replaced by a physical fear. When Horus emerged, his charisma amplified. His eyes hardened into something darker, hungry. He spoke of new truths, of the Emperor's absence, not as fact, but abandonment. He called the Great Crusade, the imperial truth, a beautiful gilded lie designed to keep us slaves. The Legion listened. Doubt found fertile ground in warriors who had given everything, and now wondered if everything was for a master who saw them as expendable tools. Loyalty curdled into resentment. My official picked captures showed a Warmaster refining his vision, a legion evolving. My private journal told a different story. Captain Abaddon's stern loyalty twisting into feral devotion to Horus alone. Little Horus Aximan's mournful eyes as if watching a beloved sculpture being defaced. Hooded, whispering visitors in the Warmaster's chambers, their presence making the air taste of ozone and spoiled meat. The Luna Wolves became the sons of Horus, their sigil sharpened, armor scuffed with soot, war cries harsher, less about honor, more about dominion. Then came the orders for Istvan III. The official briefing was a masterpiece of misdirection, but Garrison World, home to elements of the Legion deemed ideologically impure, to be pacified, cleansed. I recorded the briefing, my picture capturing cold, hard faces of the command staff. A knot of ice formed in my gut. This was not compliance, it was excision. I was assigned to a command lander to document the initial drop, the descent atmosphere electric with suppressed violence. We breached the cloud layer. Below spread the gleaming spires and landing docks of an imperial city, beautiful. The first wave, the Loyalists, planet fell, securing landing zones. Their white armor bright against the urban landscape met no resistance. The silence from the planet was deafening. Then the order came, a single word from the Warmaster broadcast across the fleet, Exterminatus. The void shimmered, then fire, not clean lance batteries, but hellish Prometheum rain of virus bombs. The atmosphere burned, the city melted like wax, air turned to poison. Tiny white specks, first wave Astartes, vanished in the Holocaust. On the command deck, silence not of horror, but of completion. Horus stood at the viewport, silhouette against the burning world. An officer next to me, a mortal man, vomited onto the polished deck. No one moved to help. The Astartes simply watched the world die, faces unreadable. Captain Erlin of the Justerin turned his helmeted gaze toward me, red lenses ember glow. "Record this, remembrancer," he growled, distortion of noble tones. I raised my picture again, recording the death of a world, etching the scene into my private journal with words of fire and blood. The shipwide vox crackled. Horus's voice, calm, resonant, utterly without remorse. The cancer has been cut away. The Legion is pure. We have taken the first step towards true liberation. The weak have been culled, the strong remain. A cheer rose, low rumble, building into a roaring wave that shook deck plates. Not a cheer of victory, but of release. The last vestiges of old oaths burned away on the pyre of Istvan III. They were free to follow their Warmaster into the dark. I did not cheer. I stood there, a ghost with a picture, my soul screaming into a silence no one could hear. The scent of ozone, oil, copper tang remained, now overlain by the smell of roasted meat and the cloying sweet lie that ripened into absolute, unforgivable truth. This was no longer a crusade, but a heresy, and I was its chronicler, trapped in the belly of the beast, my truth now the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. The silence after Istvan was the loudest sound I have ever heard. It was not an absence of noise, but a presence, a heavy psychic weight that pressed down on the ship, on our minds, on our very souls. The air in the corridors of the vengeful spirit no longer tasted of ozone and ambition. It tasted of ash and betrayal. You could breathe it in, this particulate grief, and feel the ghosts of the dead scraping at the back of your throat. We had become a charnel house sailing through the void, and the stench of our sin was a perfume we could not wash off. My official duties became a waking nightmare. I was commanded to produce a narrative of the Istvan atrocity, a term I was forbidden to use. I was to craft a story of necessary purification, the surgical removal of a cancerous element threatening the Legion's resolve. I sat at my data slate, my fingers hovering over the keys, and the words would not come. How do you describe the murder of brothers as an act of nobility? How do you paint genocide in the colors of heroism? I wrote lies. I wrote them with a cold, dead feeling in my heart. Each sentence a small betrayal of the man I once was. I described the virus bombing as a cleansing flame, the loyalists as degenerate cultists. I sold my soul, line by line, and the payment was another day of breath in my lungs. My private journal, however, drank deep of my shame and my terror. I wrote in a frantic coded script, hidden in a hollowed-out compartment behind a wall panel in my quarters. I did not just record events. I recorded the decay. I noted how the ship's interior, once a masterpiece of Imperial engineering, began to sway. It was subtle. The straight, gleaming corridors seemed to develop a slight curve if you stared at them too long. The constant, reassuring hum of the plasma drives now had a discordant, wailing undertone, like a beast in perpetual agony. The light from the Luma globes flickered with a rhythm that was not quite random, pulsing like a diseased heart. And the warriors, the sons of Horus, their transformation accelerated. It was no longer just a matter of boltered heraldry and grim demeanor. Their armor began to change. The clean white ceramite grew stained, not with mud or blood, but with a deep tarnished patina, as if centuries of decay had been compressed into solar days. Some of them began adorning their plate with spikes of bone and jagged metal. They were no longer the Emperor's finest. They were becoming his nightmares. It was around this time that the whispers began. Not the whispers of men, but the whispers of the ship itself. You would walk a deserted corridor and hear a sibilant hiss from a ventilation shaft, a sound like 1,000 serpents arguing. You would catch a fragment of a voice from a dead comm panel, urging you to let go, to embrace the truth. At first, I thought it was the strain, my own mind fracturing under the pressure. But then I saw others react to it, crewmen flinching, junior officers muttering prayers to an emperor who was no longer our master. We were not just sailing through the void. We were sailing through a sea of madness, and it was seeping through the hull. Horus held court less often, but when he did, the atmosphere was thick with a new religious fervor. He no longer spoke of the emperor's absence as a political failing. He spoke of it as a theological schism. He began using new words: the pantheon, the powers, the primordial truth. He spoke of the warp not as a dangerous tool to be navigated, but as a source of divine power that the Emperor had denied them. He sought to chain us to his dying vision of rationality. Horus would thunder, his voice now layered with a resonant echo that was not his own. He feared what we would become. He feared our ascension. I recorded these speeches, my pictor's lens capturing the faces of the Legion. Their eyes, once sharp with strategic focus, now burned with a zealous fire. They were not just soldiers following a commander. They were acolytes receiving revelation. I saw Captain Abaddon, his face a mask of rapturous fury, his fists clenched so hard the ceramite of his gauntlets groaned. He was no longer just a warrior. He was a high priest of this new, terrible faith. The final shattering of my old reality came during a fleet-wide muster. We were to be joined by new allies, legions who had seen the same truth as Horus. I was on the observation deck when the first of their ships translated into real space. It was not the clean, fiery tear of a standard warp translation. This was a wound. Reality screamed as it was torn open, vomiting forth a vessel that looked less like a ship and more like a cathedral that had been tortured into a new, blasphemous shape. It was the Conqueror, flagship of the World Eaters. I had heard tales of Angron's Legion. Their brutality was legendary, even among the Astartes. But the stories did not prepare me for the reality. The Conqueror was a scarred, ugly brute of a ship, its hull pitted and scorched, its prow shaped like a screaming horned skull. As it drew alongside the vengeful spirit, I could see its hull was not just battered, it was decorated. Chains hung from its spars, and from those chains dangled the desiccated corpses of Xenos, of humans, of other Astartes. It was a vessel that proclaimed its purpose, pain. Then came the next, a ship that seemed to be carved from a single weeping piece of obsidian, its outline blurred by a perpetual greenish mist. The Terminus Est, flagship of the Death Guard. Its very presence made the void around it seem sick, leaching the color and life from space. I felt a cold dread just looking at it, a sensation of incurable illness and despair. And then the third, a ship of breathtaking, impossible beauty. It was a swirl of pearlescent colors, its form so elegant and fluid it seemed to be a living thing, a sea creature swimming through the stars, the pride of the Emperor. But its beauty was a lie. Looking at it for too long made my eyes water and my stomach churn. It was the beauty of a cancer, of a perfectly symmetrical rot. The Emperor's children had arrived. I was ordered to the main hangar bay to document the arrival of the Primarchs. The air was thick with the smell of incense, ozone, and something else, the coppery scent of fresh blood that had been ritually spilled to welcome them. The sons of Horus were arrayed in battle formation, a sea of tarnished sea green. The atmosphere was not one of brotherly reunion. It was a gathering of predators, each sizing up the other. The first to descend was Angron. He did not walk. He erupted from his gunship. He was a mountain of scarred red flesh and brutish armor, the butcher's nails glinting on his shaven skull like a vile crown. He radiated a palpable heat, a fury so absolute it warped the air around him. He did not look at Horus. He scanned the ranks of the sons of Horus as if calculating how long it would take to kill them all. Constant growled. Next came Mortarion. He emerged from a cloud of toxic vapor, his deathly pale face hidden within the hood of his rebreather. He moved with a grim, inevitable pace, like a plague wind. Where Angron was fire, Mortarion was stagnation, the cold, final silence of the grave. He carried a scythe, and the reek of formaldehyde and blight that followed him made my eyes sting. Lastly, Fulgrim. He descended like a falling angel, his armor a masterpiece of obscene artistry, sculpted to accentuate a form of impossible perfection. He was beautiful, but it was the beauty of a venomous snake. His eyes, lilac and piercing, swept over the assembly with a look of sublime, condescending amusement. He smiled, and it was an expression of such profound, narcissistic pleasure that it felt like a violation. Horus greeted them as brothers, but the tension was a live wire. These were not the unified sons of a loving father. They were warlords, each with their own madness, bound together only by a shared hatred for the Emperor and a thirst for the power he had denied them. I recorded it all, my picture capturing this congress of monsters, but my focus was drawn to a smaller, more terrifying detail. As Fulgrim passed a group of Son of Horus legionaries, one of them, a young warrior barely out of his scout phase, stared in awe at the Phoenician's perfection. Fulgrim paused, his smile widening. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and touched the warrior's chestplate with a single perfect finger. Where he touched, the ceramite changed. The sea green color swirled, melting and reforming into a shifting, iridescent pattern of pinks and purples. The legionary gasped, stumbling back, clawing at his own armor as the change spread. crawling like a living stain across his plastron. It was not paint. It was a transmutation, a fundamental rewriting of the material itself. Within seconds, the warrior's chest was adorned with a beautiful blooming flower of fleshy pink, its center a deep vaginal slit that pulsed rhythmically. The legionary looked up at Fulgrim, his face a mask of terror and ecstasy. Fulgrim simply winked and moved on. No one intervened. No one spoke. The other sons of Horus looked away, a new fear in their eyes. This was the power they had embraced. It was not just about rebellion. It was about a reality that was no longer solid, no longer sane. That night, hidden in my chamber, my hands shaking so badly I could barely write, I scrawled in my journal, "The gods are real, and they are here. They walk among us, wearing the faces of Primarchs. Horus has not led us to freedom. He has sold us to masters who eat souls. The gold is gone. All that remains is the rust, and it is spreading. I am documenting the end of everything. My truth is a scream in the dark, and the dark is beginning to scream back." The Warmaster's fleet was no longer a military force. It was a pilgrimage of the damned, and we were all, every single one of us, heading for the sane hell. A new ritual began aboard the vengeful spirit after the other legions joined us. It was not a parade or a strategic briefing. It was a sacrament. Horus called it the Covenant, a unifying of the legions under the gaze of the new powers. Attendance was not optional. As the chief remembrancer, my presence was demanded. I was to document the birth of a new age. They herded us, the mortal officers, the tech adepts, the few remaining remembrancers who hadn't been sacrificed or broken, into the ship's primary amphitheater. This was a place usually reserved for tactical holylith displays, a vast circular chamber with tiered seating rising into darkness. But it had been transformed. The clean, functional lines were gone, obscured by hanging tapestries of stitched human skin, their tattoos forming shifting, blasphemous sigils that writhed if you stared at them. The air was thick with the smoke of burning narcotics, and something else, something organic and foul, like a slaughterhouse on a hot day. The center of the chamber was not a hololith projector, but a deep, circular pit. From it, a low, rhythmic chanting echoed, a guttural, multi-voice drone that was not in any language I knew, but that I understood in the primal, reptilian part of my brain. It was a song of ending. We were made to kneel at the edge of the tiered seats, looking down into the darkness. The Astartes of the 4 legions formed a ring around the pit, their armor reflecting the hellish, brazen light of torches that burned with green and purple flame. They were not unified in color, but they were unified in purpose. The white and blue of the Emperor's children, the dirty white of the Death Guard, the brutal brass and red of the World Eaters, and our own tarnished sea green, a palette of damnation. Then the Primarchs entered. Horus came first, not in his battle plate, but in a new ornate armor that seemed to be made of layered obsidian and molten gold. It was alive with crawling light, and the face within the helmet was a shifting phantom. One moment the noble Warmaster, the next a snarling demonic beast. He carried a mace, Worldbreaker, and it pulsed with a black energy that hurt the eyes. Angren followed, bare-chested, his body a roadmap of scars and weeping sores, the butcher's nails glinting. He was frothing at the mouth, his eyes rolled back in his skull, lost to a frenzy I could feel beating against my skin like a physical pressure. Mortarion was a stooped specter, his silence dripping a black viscous fluid that ate tiny pits into the deck. The air around him grew cold and thin, and several mortal crewmen near me began to cough, bloody phlegm spraying from their lips. Fulgrim was last, and he was changed. His form was more fluid, his movements a hypnotic dance. He was clad in little more than gossamer and sculpted plate, and his skin shimmered with a mother-of-pearl sheen. He trailed his fingers along the shoulders of the Astartes as he passed, and each one shuddered, either in pleasure or in agony. I could not tell. Horus raised Worldbreaker. The chanting from the pit ceased. The silence was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled. "Brothers!" Horus's voice was a storm, amplified by the chamber's acoustics, and something far less natural. "You have followed me into the dark. You have cast off the lies of the corpse emperor. You have embraced the primordial truth, but faith must be sealed in blood. Power must be paid for in souls." A figure was dragged into the chamber. It was a space marine, his armor stripped away, his body covered in ritual scars and burns. He was from the Raven Guard, one of the few survivors of the drop site massacre, kept alive for this purpose. He struggled, but his strength was nothing against the hands that held him. "This one," Horus boomed, "clings to the old lies. He believes in reason, in sacrifice for a distant, uncaring master. He represents the weakness we must purge from our hearts. Let his death be the seal upon our covenant. Let his suffering be the offering that binds us to the gods." The Raven Guard was thrown into the center of the pit. He landed hard but rose to his feet, defiance in his eyes. He looked up at the ring of traitors, at the Primarchs, and he spat a wad of blood onto the floor. "For the Emperor!" he screamed, his voice raw but clear. Horus laughed, a sound of shattering glass and grinding bones. "Your Emperor cannot hear you here, little bird. This place belongs to gods who listen." He gestured, and from the shadows at the edge of the pit, things emerged. They were not Astartes. They were not human. They were daemons. I had no other word for them. They were formless yet shaped, constructs of nightmare and warp stuff, all teeth and claws and glistening, impossible anatomy. They swarmed over the Raven Guard. What followed was not a battle. It was a consumption. It was an unmaking. I will not detail the specifics, for to give them words is to give them a power I wish to deny them. I will only say that the sounds were of a reality being torn apart at the seams. The Raven Guard did not die quickly. He was taken apart, piece by piece. His very essence screamed out of him over what felt like an eternity. And as he suffered, the Primarchs began to chant, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in my teeth. The Astartes joined in, their voices a crashing wave of devotion. The power in the room grew, thickening the air until it was like breathing syrup. I felt a pressure in my skull, a presence forcing its way in, showing me visions of impossible geometries and infinite despair. Then the payment was made. A pillar of iridescent fire erupted from the pit, consuming what was left of the Raven Guard and the daemons both. It did not scorch, it transformed. The energy washed over the assembled legions. I saw a son of Horus claw at his helmet as horns of bone burst from his forehead. I saw an emperor's child weep tears of liquid pearl as his skin became a canvas of ever-shifting, neurotic tattoos. A Death Guard's armor fused to his body, becoming a second skin of weeping, necrotic flesh. A World Eater grew in size, his muscles bulging and tearing, only to be knit back together by strands of raw, angry energy. The Primarchs were changing too. Horus seemed to swell, his armor becoming more organic, more a part of him. Angron's wounds sealed, but the nails glowed brighter, burning with a malevolent sentience. Mortarian's scythe dripped with a new, living poison. Fulgrim seemed to achieve a new peak of beauty, so perfect it was a mockery of all that was natural. The power receded, leaving a silence broken only by the heavy, wet breathing of the transformed Astartes. The air stank of ozone, blood, and spent ecstasy. Horus turned, his gaze sweeping over us, the mortal witnesses. His eyes, now pools of molten amber, fixed on me. My picture was still running, its red recording light, a tiny defiant spark in the overwhelming darkness. You see, Sirin Valerius. His voice was an intimate whisper in my mind, though his lips did not move. You see the truth now? This is not destruction. This is evolution. This is the future of mankind, unshackled, ascendant. He gestured to the pit, now empty and clean, as if nothing had ever happened. Record it, all of it. Let the galaxy know the price of defiance and the reward of faith. I lowered my picture. My body was trembling. My soul felt scoured. I had witnessed a miracle of evil. I had seen the veil torn aside and the grinning, hungry face of the universe revealed. There was no going back. The imperial truth was not just a lie. It was a feeble shield against a horror we were never meant to comprehend. I returned to my quarters and vomited until there was nothing left but bile. Then, with hands that felt like they belonged to another man, I opened my journal. The page was blank. For a long time, I could not write. What words could capture that? What language existed for such an atrocity? Finally, I dipped my stylus into the pot of ink, my hand moving almost of its own accord. I wrote a single sentence, the ink blotted with tears I did not remember shedding. Today, I saw a man unmade and a god born from the pieces. We are not rebels. We are a harvest, and the reapers are walking among us. Silence is a lie. In the wake of the covenant, the vengeful spirit was anything but silent. It was a chorus of groans. The ship itself seemed to be in constant, low-level agony, its metal bones protesting the new, blasphemous energies that pulsed through its veins. The air hummed with a psychic static that set your teeth on edge, a permanent, high-pitched whine just at the threshold of hearing. It was the sound of reality being stressed to its breaking point. And beneath that, if you listened closely in the empty corridors, you could hear the whispers. They were no longer just suggestions. They were conversations, arguments, promises. My official work became a perverse liturgy. I was to craft the gospel of this new age, Bilictitio Horusian. I wrote speeches for Horus that were sermons filled with venom and revelation. I edited picked captures of the transformed legions, airbrushing the most overt mutations, turning the grotesque into the augmented, the monstrous into the blessed. I was a ghostwriter for a daemon, my words used to seduce and corrupt every world we approached. My name, Sirin Valerius, was becoming a byword for treachery across the galaxy, and I had to wear that mask every single day. The shame was a hot acid that dripped constantly on my soul, but my private journal thrived in this darkness. It was my only confessor. I began to document not just events, but the sensory decay of our reality. I noted how the ship's chronometers would sometimes run backwards, or stutter to a halt for hours before lurching forward. I described the food from the replicators, which now sometimes tasted of blood or ashes, no matter the setting. I wrote of the crewmen I saw staring at blank walls, their lips moving in silent prayer to the new pantheon. Their eyes wide with a fear that had curdled into devotion. It was during this time of slow, creeping madness that I found an unlikely ally. Her name was Evangeline, a junior astropath who had been attached to the fleet since before the heresy. She was a wisp of a woman, her eyes pale and sightless, her mind tuned to the impossible frequencies of the warp. I found her one day, curled in a fetal position in a disused relay station, trembling uncontrollably. "The song," she whispered, her voice raw. "It's so loud now. It's not a song of stars. It's a song of teeth." I risked everything to bring her water, to sit with her. We were two ghosts haunting the same cursed house. She could not see the physical changes aboard the ship, but she could feel the psychic cancer more acutely than anyone. She described it to me in shuddering, broken metaphors. "The Warmaster, he is a black hole now," she breathed one day. Her blind eyes wide with terror. "He does not just command, he consumes. The light of every soul near him is bent towards his hunger. And the others, the angel's son, he is a single, perfect, screaming note that goes on forever. The Lord of Flies, he is the silence after the rot has set in. And the Red Angel, he is the heartbeat of murder itself." Through Evangeline, I began to understand the true architecture of our damnation. This was not a simple military rebellion. We were caught in a war of metaphysics, a battle for the very substance of reality. The legions were not just armies. They were conduits, their collective hatred and ambition fueling the entities they now served. Horus began to spend more time in the depths of the ship, in chambers that were no longer on any schematic. When he emerged, his presence was heavier, more oppressive. The air would grow cold, and the whispers would rise to a crescendo of pleading and threat. He was planning the final push. Terra, the Imperial Palace, the throat of the Emperor. A war council was called, and I was commanded to record it. It was held in a strategium that was no longer a room of clean lines and holowiths. The walls were now organic, veined with pulsating purple tissue. The central table was a slab of obsidian that wept a black, salty fluid. The Primarchs were there, more changed than ever. Horus presided. A giant clad in a shadow that moved independently of the light. Angron was a hulking engine of rage, his form swollen, patches of his skin replaced with brass plates that were riveted directly to his flesh. Mortarian's respirator hissed with a life of its own, and tiny, nurgling demons clung to his armor like grotesque barnacles, chirping and giggling. Fulgrim was barely recognizable, his form elongated. His face a mask of sublime, arrogant beauty, but with a forked tongue that flickered out to taste the corrupted air. They were discussing the final assault, but their language was not that of generals. It was the language of high priests planning a sacrificial offering on an unimaginable scale. The palace walls will be breached not by lance fire, but by despair, Mortarian intoned, his voice the rasp of a coffin lid sliding open. My children will seed the air with glorious pestilence. Their hope will rot from within before the first shell falls. Let my legion be the tip of the spear, Angron vored, slamming a fist the size of my torso onto the table, cracking the stone. I will break the gates. I will pile the skulls of the custodies so high they will blot out the Terran sun. Patience, brother, Fulgrim purred, tracing a pattern on the table that smoked where his finger touched. The perfection of the kill is in the anticipation. Let them see us coming. Let their fear mature into a fine vintage. The fall of their spirits will be a symphony. I wish to savor every note." Horus listened, his head tilted. "You all have your parts to play. The palace is a bastion of the old lies, and lies must be shattered with absolute truth, our truth." His gaze then fell upon a new figure, one who had been standing in the shadows. But the corpse emperor has his own tricks. His own sorceries. The figure stepped forward. It was a space marine in the blue and gold of the Thousand Suns, his armor intricately engraved, his helmet shaped like the head of a bird of prey. Armin. He bowed to Horus, but there was no submission in the gesture, only a cold intellectual curiosity. "The Emperor's psychic defenses are formidable, my Lord Warmaster," Armin said, his voice calm and measured. A stark contrast to the bestial growls and decadent purrs of the others. "The palace is warded with sigils of immense power. To break them requires a counter-magic of equal potency. My legion, what remains of it, can provide that." A schism flickered in the room. Angron snarled, his hatred for Psykers a palpable force. Mortarion looked upon Ahriman with undisguised contempt, but Horus raised a hand, silencing them. "The tools of the enemy must be turned against him," Horus declared. "Your sorcery, Ahriman, will be the can opener for this particular can. You will unravel the Emperor's protections. You will make a hole for the truth to flood in." The planning continued, a symphony of annihilation. They spoke of mustering the full, hellish might of the 9 traitor legions. They spoke of demonic pacts that would allow entities of the warp to manifest on the soil of Terra itself. They spoke of the final, personal confrontation, the death of a god. I recorded it all, my picture capturing the monstrous faces, the blasphemous strategies, but my mind was reeling. The scale of it was beyond comprehension. This was not a war for a throne. It was a war to unmake creation and remake it in a new, terrible image. After the council, as the Primarchs filed out, Ahriman paused beside me. He looked at my picture, then at me. His eyes, visible through his helmet's lenses, were ancient and infinitely weary. "You document the turning of the age, remembrancer," he said, his tone not unkind, but distant, as if he were speaking to an interesting insect. "A privilege." "Of a sort. Do you understand what you're witnessing?" "I'm trying to, my lord," I managed to reply, my throat dry. "Do not try to understand it with reason," he advised, a hint of pity in his voice. "Reason is a cage we are breaking out of. Observe, record, but do not seek meaning. There is only power and the will to wield it." He left me then, and I was alone in the throbbing organic strategium. The weight of his words pressed down on me. There is only power. It was the absolute core of the heresy. The imperial truth had been about purpose, about a future for humanity. This was about the self, unleashed, the ultimate cosmic selfishness. I sought out Evangeline that night. I found her in her chamber, which she had lined with scraps of lead and copper in a futile attempt to block out the psychic cacophony. She was rocking back and forth, humming a lullaby from a world that no longer existed. "They are coming for the throne world, Eva," I whispered. She stopped rocking. Her blind eyes turned towards me, and for a moment I saw a reflection of the cosmic storm in their milky depths. "I know," she said, her voice a hollow echo. "The song is changing. It's becoming a scream, a single focused scream aimed at the heart of the galaxy. The Emperor, he is a golden light, So bright it hurts to even feel it from here. Oh, the darkness. The darkness is so very hungry. She reached out a trembling hand and found mine. Her grip was ice cold. "They will use us, Siren," she whispered, her voice dropping to a terrified hush. "The mortal crew. They are fuel for the final jump, for the rituals, our fear, our pain, our souls. They are the kindling for the fire that will burn Terra." A new, more personal terror seized me. We were not just witnesses. We were a resource, a crop to be harvested. I returned to my journal. The entries were becoming more frantic, less coherent. I was no longer just documenting a history. I was writing a suicide note for the entire human race. I described Ahriman's cold intellect, Evangeline's terrifying visions, the Primarchs' casual planning of genocide. "The echoes of Terra are not just the memories of a lost home," I wrote, the stylus scratching violently across the page. "They are the screams of its future. We are sailing towards a destination that is already on fire, and we are carrying the torches. My truth is a shard of glass in my hand. I clutch it tight, and it cuts me. But it is the only thing that proves I am still real. The laughter of the gods is so loud now, I can barely hear myself think." A journey to Terra was not a voyage. It was a descent. The warp, that sea of souls we navigated, was no longer a turbulent but predictable current. It had become a screaming maelstrom, reflecting the fury and ambition of the fleet it carried. The Geller fields groaned under a constant, clawing pressure. Viewports became useless, showing only a kaleidoscope of insane colors and the fleeting, screaming faces of things that should not exist. The ship was a bubble of blasphemy in an ocean of madness, and the line between the two was wearing dangerously thin. The changes aboard the Vengeful Spirit accelerated from a creep to a gallop. Corridors would sometimes elongate into impossible, perspective-defying tunnels, or shrink into claustrophobic, fleshy tubes. I once turned a corner and found myself staring into a chamber that was a perfect replica of my childhood home on Terra, the furniture made of weeping, fused human bodies. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs, and when I turned the corner again, it was just a munitions storage bay. Reality was becoming a suggestion. My own soul felt under siege. The whispers were no longer external. They were in my head, a constant seductive commentary on my fears, my regrets, my deepest, most hidden shames. Your words are so weak, Siren, so insignificant. Join your voice to the chorus. It is so much easier to praise the dark than to fight it. I took to muttering the imperial truth to myself, a desperate, secular prayer against the psychic onslaught. It felt like trying to stop a tidal wave with a piece of paper. Evangeline, the astropath, was my only anchor. We met in secret in the forgotten spaces between the ship's groaning decks. Her condition had worsened. Her pale skin was now traced with faint silver lines, like cracks in porcelain, and she claimed she could see without her eyes, not the physical world, but the shifting landscapes of the warp and the blazing, corrupted auras of the legions. "The sons of Horus are no longer green," she told me one day, her voice a thin reed in the howling psychic wind. "They are black, a hungry, absorbing black. The World Eaters are a pulsating, bloody red. The Death Guard are a sickly, stagnant green. And the Emperor's children, they are a blinding, painful riot of colors that have no name. It hurts to look at them." She gripped my arm, her fingers like ice. "But the Warmaster, Siren, Horus is a whole, a void. He is not a color. He is an absence that pulls all light and hope into it. He is not becoming a god. He is becoming the vessel for a god's hunger. Her words chilled me to the bone. We were not just following a rebel. We were feeding a cosmic predator. The final stage of our approach began with a new ritual, one that involved the entire fleet. Horus commanded a mustering of all mortal crew in the primary launch bays. Attendance was mandatory. The penalty for absence was being fed alive to the things that now haunted the lower decks. We were packed in, thousands upon thousands of us, a terrified, stinking mass of humanity under the cold, judging eyes of the Astartes. Horus appeared on a high gantry, silhouetted against the raging hellscape of the warp, visible through the vast bay doors. He did not speak. He simply raised his arms, and then the singing began. It started with the Emperor's children, a chord of such perfect, agonizing beauty that it made people weep and bleed from their ears. Then the Death Guard began a low, dirge-like chant, a sound of rot and despair. The World Eaters added a wordless, roaring beat of pure fury. And the Sons of Horus provided a sibilant, whispering counter-melody that spoke of promises of power and oblivion. This was not music. It was a psychic weapon, a sonic assault on the soul. The sound washed over us, and I felt my sanity begin to unravel. I saw men and women beside me claw their own eyes out. Others began to convulse, speaking in tongues, their bodies twisting into impossible shapes. Some simply laughed, a high, hysterical sound, as their minds shattered like glass. I fell to my knees, my hands clamped over my ears, but it was useless. The song was inside me. It was in my blood, in my bones. It promised an end to the struggle, an end to the fear. It whispered that surrender was the ultimate freedom. "Let go, Siren," the chorus sang in my mind. "Your truth is a burden. Our truth is a release. Terra will burn. The Emperor will die. Why struggle? Why suffer? Be part of the beautiful burning end." I felt a warmth spread through me, a delicious, seductive lethargy. It would be so easy to just stop fighting, to open my mind and let the song in, to let it rewrite me as it was rewriting the ship, the Legion, the very laws of physics. Then I thought of my journal, the hidden pages, the truth. It was a tiny, cold shard of defiance in the warm, welcoming darkness. I clung to it. I focused on the feel of the stylus in my hand, the scratch of ink on parchment, the weight of the words I had written. I remembered the face of the Raven Guard in the pit, his defiance in the face of certain horrible death. No, the word was a silent scream in the heart of the hurricane. It was nothing. It was everything. I forced my head up, my eyes streaming with blood-tinged tears. I looked at Horus, at the center of the storm, and for a fleeting second, through the layers of demonic power and cosmic ambition, I saw something else. A flicker, a shadow of the man he had been. A face, trapped behind a mask of godhood, screaming in a silence no one could hear. The moment passed. The song reached a crescendo, a climax of such overwhelming power that I felt my consciousness slipping away. When I awoke, I was back in my quarters, my body aching, my mind feeling bruised and violated. I did not know how I got there. The launch bay was empty. I learned later that a third of the mortal crew had been irrevocably changed, turned into wailing, mindless mutants or zealotous fanatics. The rest of us, we were just broken. Our will had been tested, and for those of us who resisted, it had been found wanting. We were marked as stubborn, difficult, expendable. I crawled to my hiding place and retrieved my journal. My hand was steady as I wrote. The experience had scoured me clean of doubt. I knew now, with absolute certainty, that I would die in this war, but I also knew I would die with my truth intact. They have weaponized sound. They have weaponized faith. They have turned hope into a poison. I have felt the gravity of their damnation, and it is a comfortable weight. It is easy to fall. I have chosen to stand on legs that will surely break. The siege of my soul is over. The walls are shattered. The city is in ruins, but the flag still flies. It is a tattered, meaningless thing, but it is mine. Record until my last breath. I will be the echo they cannot silence. The flag may be torn, the world may be ash, but the words I write remain. I will be the echo they cannot silence. The maelstrom ended with a sound like the universe gasping for breath. We translated back into real space, and the sudden silence was more deafening than the warped scream. Before us hung Terra, not the gleaming, jeweled cradle of humanity from the Imperial Primars, but a world under siege. Its night side was a constellation of fire, the flash of orbital defenses and the impact of shells creating a perpetual false dawn. The day side was scarred by vast black smoke clouds and the ugly metallic blooms of landing craft. It was a vision of the end. The sight struck me with a physical force. This was my home, the place of my birth, my education, my induction into the Remembrancer Order. I had walked its hive cities, marveled at its monuments. Now it was a battlefield. The Imperial Palace, that mountain-sized fortress, was a bastion under a constant, flickering dome of void shields, around which the traitor fleet swarmed like flies on a dying animal. Any last faint hope that this was all a terrible dream died in that moment. This was real. The death of the dream was happening before my eyes. The mood aboard the Vengeful Spirit shifted instantly. The chaotic fervor of the warp journey crystallized into a cold, focused hatred. This was the objective, the final prize. The Astartes moved with a new purpose, their rituals sharpened to a killing edge. It was no longer about revelation, it was about annihilation. I was assigned to a command deck observation post, my duty to document the opening stages of the solar assault. The Warmaster's strategy was a masterpiece of brutal, overwhelming force. He did not try to outmaneuver the loyalist fleets. He simply advanced, a sledgehammer aimed at the heart. The first to meet us were the Imperial fists. Your ships, painted in defiant yellow, formed an unbreakable wall around the approaches to Terra. They were the Praetorians of Terra, and they would die to the last man before yielding an inch. The void battle that commenced was of a scale and ferocity that dwarfed anything I had ever witnessed or recorded. Lance beams the size of city blocks carved through hulls. Macro cannon shells detonated in silent, flowers of fire that consumed entire squadrons. Boarding torpedoes slammed into ships like ticks, delivering their deadly cargo of space marines into the heart of the enemy. I watched through the augmented spokes as a Sons of Horus battle barge, the Dies Irae, locked horns with an Imperial Fist's fortress monastery, the Eternal Crusader. They drifted together, pouring fire at point-blank range, their void shields overloading in cascading eruptions of energy. Then, the boarding actions began, tiny, frantic flashes of light deep within gutted hulls, where Astartes fought Astartes in the dark, a microcosm of the greater war. Horus observed it all, from his command throne, his face a mask of cold calculation. He did not cheer the victories or rage at the losses. Each ship destroyed, each life lost, was just a number on a slate, a resource expended towards his goal. He was playing a game of regicide with living pieces, and the board was the solar system. Then the Iron Warriors arrived, Their fleet was a stark, brutal contrast to the chaotic energy of the other legions. Their ships were not adorned with demonic icons or weeping flesh. They were functional, angular, covered in guns. They were siege engines, pure and simple. Their Primarch, Perturabo, did not come aboard the Vengeful Spirit for grand councils. He communicated through terse, efficient data bursts. His legion went straight to work. I was granted access, under heavy guard, to observe the Iron Warriors' command center. It was a revelation. Where the other legion's strategiums had become temples to dark gods, the Iron Warriors was a model of cold, ruthless logic. Hololiths displayed the palace defenses in staggering detail. Each wall, each gun emplacement, each power conduit mapped and analyzed. Perturabo's strategy was not about corruption or terror. It was about mathematics, applying precisely the right amount of force to the right point at the right time until something broke. I watched as they targeted a section of the palace's outer wall. They calculated structural harmonics, identified stress points, and unleashed a coordinated barrage from 100 batteries that struck in a perfectly timed sequence. The wall disintegrated, turning into a cloud of dust and rubble. It was terrifying in its efficiency. No rage, no religious fervor, only the absolute, dispassionate application of violence. I saw Perturabo himself on a view screen, directing the siege from his flagship, the Iron Blood. He was a giant in brutally functional gray iron armor, covered in schematics and weapon mounts. He showed no emotion. The cold mechanical approach to war was, in its own way, more horrifying than the blood madness of the World Eaters. The World Eaters were a storm you could only endure. The Iron Warriors were a machine. A grinding, inexorable process that would not stop until everything was dust. I recorded it all, my picture capturing the relentless mathematical destruction. I saw the Imperial Fists and the Iron Warriors, two legions of siege masters, locked in a battle of wills tearing the palace apart. It was a war of architects, each trying to outbuild and outdestroy the other. The scars they were leaving on Terra would last for millennia, if any survived. Returning to my quarters, I felt a new kind of despair. The passion of the other traitor legions was a fire that might eventually burn itself out. But the Iron Warriors' hatred was cold iron. It would never fade. It would only wait. I wrote in my journal that night. The images of calculated destruction burned into my mind. I have seen two faces of the heresy today, the hot rage of the World Eater and the cold hatred of the Iron Warrior. The first would burn the galaxy for the thrill of it. The second would dismantle it, piece by piece, out of sheer, spiteful logic. We are not just fighting monsters. We are fighting a force that hates creation itself. The scars they are carving into Terra are nothing compared to the scars they are carving into the future. Every wall that falls is another brick removed from the foundation of reason. The Iron Warriors do not serve the gods of the warp. They serve a god of entropy, and their liturgy is the sound of things breaking. The Void War was a spectacle of clean, hard physics, explosions and lance beams and shattered metal. The war on the surface, as it filtered up to us through garbled Vox traffic and flickering Pict feeds, was something else entirely. It was a plague, and the Death Guard were its carriers. I had thought the Vengeful Spirit was a corrupted place. I had thought I understood decay. I was a child playing in a tidy garden, ignorant of the vast rotting wilderness beyond the fence. The Death Guard's assault on the spaceports and the lower hive spires introduced me to the true face of entropy. It was not mere destruction. It was a transformation, a perverse, fecund creation. My access to the command channels granted me a front-row seat to this new horror. The picked feeds from the surface were often unstable, shot through with static and strange organic interference. But what they showed was enough to haunt the rest of my days. I saw Imperial Army regiments, their lasguns firing in disciplined volleys, suddenly racked with coughing fits. Their skin would blister and blacken, their bodies swelling with gaseous putrefaction until they burst, spraying a corrosive bile that infected their comrades. I saw stalwart Imperial fists, their yellow armor a beacon of defiance, find their ceramite pitted and rusted in minutes, the joints seizing up with a crust of crystalline growth. Their legendary resilience meant nothing. They did not die quickly. They stood, trapped in their own armor as their bodies slowly liquefied from the inside. Their final moments a silent, agonized scream behind their helmeted visors. The Death Guard themselves were changed. They were no longer merely Astartes touched by decay. They were avatars of it. Their armor was a part of them, fused to bloated, necrotic flesh. They moved with a slow, inexorable pace, utterly unconcerned with the fire poured into them. Bolter rounds would punch through their bodies, and they would not even flinch, the wounds closing with maggots or simply being ignored. They were joyous in their work, laughing with wet, gurgling sounds as they spread their grandfather's gifts. Then came the day the command channel captured the fall of the Lion's Gate spaceport. It was not a battle, it was a conversion. The Death Guard, led by Mortarion himself, had broken through the outer defenses. The picked feed from a high orbital spysat showed the vast landing fields and hangar bays. At first, it was a scene of frantic, heroic resistance. Then, Mortarion raised his scythe, silence, and a greenish fog began to pour from the weapon, a physical thing that rolled across the tarmac like a tidal wave. Where the fog touched, reality sickened. The gray permacrete turned to a spongy black soil. The skeletons of downed ships sprouted fleshy, pulsating fungi. The dead did not lie still. They rose, not as mindless zombies, but as bloated, laughing plague bearers, their bodies bursting with new, horrific life. The very air shimmered with a miasma of despair. The spaceport was not being destroyed. It was being remade. It was becoming a garden of Nurgle. I watched, my stomach churning, as a grove of shivering, fleshy trees sprouted from the main concourse, their branches heavy with sobbing, living fruit that had once been men. A river of thick, yellow pus now flowed where the central drainage channel had been. The remaining loyalists, trapped in this newly born hell, were not killed. They were embraced. I saw a squad of Imperial fists, their armor encased in a rapidly hardening amber-like resin. Their bodies inside slowly melting into a nutrient soup that fed the grotesque new flora growing from their shoulder pads. Mortarion stood at the center of it all, a reaper in a field of his own harvest. He was no longer just a grim warrior. He was a force of nature, a walking pandemic. His presence alone seemed to accelerate the rot. He was not killing Terra. He was infecting it, making it a part of himself, a part of his grandfather's eternal cycles of death and rebirth. The command deck on the Vengeful Spirit was silent. Even the most hardened Sons of Horus officers looked away from the picked feed, a rare flicker of something like disgust on their faces. This was not the honorable war they had been promised. This was a desecration that went beyond their understanding of battle. Horus, however, watched with keen interest. Mortarion makes the ground itself our ally, he mused, his voice a low rumble. He does not just break their walls, he breaks their will to live. There is no heroism in fighting a disease. There is only suffering and despair. He was right. The horror of the Death Guard was not in the violence, but in the absolute, nihilistic hopelessness they engendered. They made a mockery of sacrifice. What was the point of dying for a cause if your death only fertilized the enemy's garden? That night, the whispers in the ship changed. They became damp. I heard the sound of dripping water, of fat flies buzzing, of wet, slopping footsteps following me in empty corridors. The air began to carry a faint, sweet smell of rot underneath the ozone and blood. The Death Guard's victory was not confined to the surface. Their power, their very essence, was bleeding back up through the fleet, contaminating us all. I sought out Evangeline, but found her chamber empty. A trail of slimy, phosphorescent moss led from her door into the darkness of a disused ventilation shaft. I did not follow it. I knew, with a cold certainty, that the garden had claimed its first blossom aboard our ship. The astropaths, alone, more isolated than ever, I retreated to my journal. The words came out in a frantic, feverish scrawl, as if I were trying to expel a contagion from my own mind. I have seen a garden grow today, a garden of pus and despair. The Death Guard do not wage war. They cultivate. They are farmers, and their crop is suffering. They have shown me that there are fates worse than death. There is the death that does not end. The life that is a perpetual, agonizing decay. Mortarion has not conquered the spaceport. He has married it. He has made it a part of his own endless, putrefying existence. The Imperial truth taught us that the universe is rational. Nurgle's truth is that it is a joke, a chaotic, meaningless cycle of birth and rot. And the only sane response is to embrace the filth and find joy in the despair. I feel the damp in my bones. I hear the flies in my dreams. The garden is not just on Terra. It is in us. It has always been in us, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. If the Death Guard were a creeping organic corruption, the Emperor's children were a calculated aesthetic one. Their assault was not about territory or strategic advantage. It was about sensation. They were connoisseurs of collapse, and the fall of Terra was to be their ultimate masterpiece. The picked feeds from the sectors they targeted were even worse than those from the Death Guard's front, because they were beautiful. The Emperor's children did not create blighted gardens. They crafted hellish art installations on a planetary scale. They targeted the cultural hubs, the hive spires that housed the last remnants of Terran art, music, and history. They did not simply destroy these places. They defiled them with a meticulous, loving attention to detail. I watched a feed from the Adamant Citadel, a fortress library that held some of the oldest surviving texts from Old Earth. The Emperor's children did not burn the books. They unbound them and used the parchment to wallpaper a vast central chamber, the words and illustrations forming a screaming, chaotic mosaic. Then, using living flayed scribes and psychers as their brushes, they painted over them in vibrant, shrieking colors, creating a living fresco of agony that pulsed and writhed to a deafening symphonic score. I saw a transmission from the Hall of Legacies, where the banners of countless victorious Imperial regiments were kept. The Emperor's children took those banners and sewed them together into a single vast tapestry, using the still living bodies of the regiment's captured standard bearers as the thread. The resulting, twitching banner was then flown from the highest spire, a grotesque living monument to their victory. Their leader, Fulgrim, was at the heart of it all. He had shed the last vestiges of his warrior form. He was a serpentine daemon prince now, a creature of impossible grace and obscene proportion. He moved through the ruins of Terra's culture like a sculptor through clay, reshaping it according to his own warped senses. He was no longer seeking perfection. He was redefining it. Perfection was no longer harmony and proportion. It was the ultimate, most exquisite extreme of any sensation. And the most exquisite sensation of all, he had discovered, was the moment of absolute, total ruin. The command deck received a direct, unsolicited voxcast from Fulgrim himself. It was not a strategic report. It was a performance. The main viewer lit up, not with a map, but with a scene from the Palatine Theater, one of the most revered stages on Terra. The stage was strewn with the mutilated bodies of players and musicians. Fulgrim stood center stage, his form glistening, holding the severed head of the theater's master of ceremonies. The audio was a cacophony of screams, discordant music, and Fulgrim's own melodious voice. "Brother!" Fulgrim sang, his voice a weapon of seductive horror. "You must see this. The finale is upon us. The grand narrative of the Imperium reaches its climax, and I have rewritten the final act. Observe the crescendo." The camera panned to show his legion, the Emperor's children, engaged in a bizarre, ritualized slaughter of the theater's audience. But they were not simply killing them. They were arranging the deaths for maximum aesthetic impact. A burst of flame here to create a dramatic shadow, a specific chord-like scream there to harmonize with the music. It was a massacre composed with the care of a symphony. "Do you see, Horus?" Fulgrim purred, cradling the head like a lover. They thought their stories, their art, their culture had meaning. They built beast temples to their own insignificance. I am giving their existence purpose. I am making their deaths a work of art. This is the only meaning there is, the beauty of the end. He then looked directly into the picture, his slitted eyes seeming to lock with mine across the void. "And you, little chronicler, are you capturing this? Are you finding the right words, the perfect cadence to describe the shattering of a world soul? This is the ultimate truth you sought to record. Not the dry, dusty truth of facts, but the wet, screaming truth of experience." The transmission cut out. The command deck was utterly silent. The cold, logical brutality of the Iron Warriors was one thing. The despairing rot of the Death Guard was another. But this joyful, artistic evil was something that touched a new, deeper fear. It made a game of atrocity. It found ecstasy in extinction. Horus finally spoke, his voice low and devoid of any appreciation for his brother's art. "The Third Legion secures the Western Spires. Their methods are effective." There was no praise, only a cold acknowledgement of a tool that was fulfilling its function, no matter how distasteful its mechanism. I realized then that the heresy was not a unified movement. It was a coalition of different madnesses, held together only by Horus's will and a shared hatred. The World Eaters hated. The Death Guard despaired. The Emperor's children felt, and their feelings were a holocaust. That night, the whispers in the shit became melodies, haunting, beautiful, and utterly maddening. I would hear a fragment of a sublime violin concerto that would slowly distort into the sound of a human voice being slowly flayed. I saw crewmen dancing in the corridors, their movements graceful and precise, their eyes empty sockets, smiles of pure bliss on their faces as they waltzed themselves to death, colliding with walls until their bodies were broken pulp. The Emperor's children had turned suffering into a sacrament and atrocity into an aesthetic. They had proven that beauty was not truth. Beauty was a weapon, and they were using it to scalp the soul of my whole world. I wrote in my journal, my hand trembling not with fear, but with a profound, soul-sick nausea. Fulgrim has shown me that evil is not the opposite of good. It is the perversion of it. He has taken beauty, the one thing we thought could save us, and he has weaponized it. He has turned art into a torture device. He has made music into a murder weapon. The Palatine Theater was not a massacre. It was a critique, a statement on the meaninglessness of human endeavor, and it was brilliant, and it was utterly, irredeemably damned. I have recorded the Death Guard's despair and the World Eater's rage, but the Emperor's children's joy is the most terrifying thing of all. They are not destroying Terra, they are improving it. They are making it perfect. And their perfection is a void that swallows all light, all hope, all meaning. My words are inadequate. My truth is a clumsy, ugly thing next to their beautiful, beautiful lies. A new shadow fell over the siege, both literal and metaphysical. It was a shadow of wings. The blood angels had arrived. From my observation post on the command deck, I saw their fleet, a spearhead of brilliant red and gold, tear into the flank of the traitor armada with the fury of avenging angels. They were led by their Primarch Sanguinius, the great angel, the most beloved of all the Emperor's sons. Even through the scopes, his presence was a lance of pure, undiluted light in the gathering gloom. He stood on the hull of his flagship, the Red Tear. His white wings spread against the star-strewn black, his face a mask of tragic fury. He was hope made manifest, a living rebuttal to the darkness we served, and Horus feared him. I saw it, a flicker in the Warmaster's aura, a minute tightening around his eyes as the augurs confirmed the Blood Angel's arrival. He had accounted for the Imperial Fist's stoicism, the White Scar's speed, but Sanguinius was a variable that burned too brightly to predict. The angel was not just a warrior. He was a symbol. His very existence on the battlefield was a refutation of Horus's entire claim. How could the Warmaster be the rightful heir when such perfection fought for the Emperor? The battle that erupted was the most savage I had yet witnessed. The Blood Angels did not fight with the methodical defense of the Imperial Fists or the hit-and-run tactics of the White Scars. They fought with a kind of sacred rage, a beautiful, terrible violence that was as much art as war. They boarded traitor ships not as invaders, but as cleansing fire. Their war cries were hymns, their bolter fire a divine percussion. I watched a feed from a Sons of Horus vessel, the Bloodied Saber, as it was boarded by a single company of blood angels. They moved through the corrupted corridors like a tide of red ceramite and pure fury. They did not just kill, they purified. Where the Death Guard left rot and the Emperor's children left decadent art, the Blood Angels left only clean, broken bodies and the lingering scent of incense. They fought with a desperate, knowing sorrow, as if they were already mourning the world they had come to save. But the traitor fleet was too vast, its corruption too deep. The Blood Angels' assault was a brilliant, fleeting flash of lightning in a perpetual storm. They were slowly surrounded, pressed on all sides by the sheer, grinding weight of the sons of Horus, the Ire warriors' relentless artillery, and the daemonic auxiliaries that now swarmed through the void like schools of piranhas. A pivotal moment came when Sanguinius himself, in act of unimaginable bravery or despair, launched himself from the red tier and landed upon the hull of the vengeful spirit. He did it alone, a single angel. Coming to face the devil in his own lair, the command deck erupted into controlled chaos. Alarms blared. Horus rose from his throne, his face a mixture of fury and something else. Anticipation. This was the confrontation he had both desired and dreaded. "Let him come," Horus whispered, and the words carried through the ship like a chilling wind. "Clear a path to the throne room. No one is to interfere. The angel is mine." We watched on the internal Pictphoebes as Sanguinius fought his way through the ship. It was not a battle. It was a pilgrimage of violence. He moved through the warped organic corridors, his golden armor blazing, his wings shedding feathers of pure light. He encountered sons of Horus, world eaters, even a pack of bloodletters, and he destroyed them all. His power spear, the blade in carmine, was a blur of motion, each strike a perfect, lethal prayer. He was divinity in motion, and for a breathtaking moment, I dared to hope. I dared to believe that one perfect being could stem the tide of damnation. He reached the great antechamber before Horus's throne room, and there he was met not by Horus, but by a figure I had hoped never to see again. Angron, the Red Angel, now a fully fledged daemon Primarch, a monster of brass and rage, whose very presence made the air boil with hatred. The confrontation was a clash of fundamental opposites. Sanguinius, a height of humanity's potential, graceful, noble, and filled with a sorrowful purpose. Angron, the depths of its fall, a brute of pure, mindless aggression. "You are a traitor, brother," Sanguinius said. His voice clear and resonant even over the feed's distortion. Angron's response was a roar that shook the picture. "I am free!" They fought. It was the most brutal, primal combat I have ever witnessed. Angron was a force of nature, all unchecked power and savage, hacking blows with his black blade. Sanguinius was a master duelist, using his wings to perform impossible maneuvers, dodging and weaving. Striking with precision where Angron was all broad, destructive sweeps. He fought not to match the Red Angel's rage, but to outthink it. It seemed an impossible task. Angron was a daemon, his wounds closing almost instantly. His strength inexhaustible. He beat Sanguinius down, breaking his armor, shattering his perfect wings. The angel fought on, his face a mask of pain and determination, but he was being worn away, piece by piece. Then, as Angron raised his blade for a final decapitating strike, Sanguinius saw an opening, a flaw in the daemon's frenzied style. With a final surge of strength, he drove the blade in carmine up through Angron's jaw and into his skull. The daemon Primarch froze. A shockwave of energy erupted from him. He did not die. A daemon cannot truly die, but his physical form could not hold. With a final guttural scream of thwarted fury, Angron dissolved into a cloud of red mist and brass shards. Banished back to the warp, Sanguinius stood alone in the chamber, panting, his body broken, his wings tattered, but victorious. He had done the impossible. He had slain a daemon Primarch, but the cost was etched into his very being. He leaned heavily on his spear, his divine light dimmed. He had expended everything to defeat one brother, and now the greatest of them all still waited behind the final doors. He pushed them open and entered the throne room of Horus Heresy. The feed from inside was unstable, corrupted by the immense psychic energies within. I saw glimpses. Horus no longer even pretending at humanity, a colossal figure of dark power clad in the malevolent. Sentient armor he had been gifted, sanguineous, a battered, bleeding angel standing before a god of darkness. They spoke. I could not hear the words, but I saw the postures. Horus, offering, persuading. Sanguineous, refusing, his stance one of absolute, unyielding defiance. Then Horus attacked. The fight was not a duel. It was an execution. The Sanguineous who had fought Angron was a shadow of his true self. The Sanguineous who faced Horus was a wounded, exhausted warrior. Horus, swollen with the power of all four chaos gods, was beyond him. He toyed with the angel. He broke his legs. He crushed his chest. He mocked his loyalty, his beauty, his very essence. The last thing the picked feed showed clearly before it dissolved into static was Horus, holding the broken body of Sanguineous in one hand, and with the other, he slowly, deliberately snapped the angel's beautiful white wings. The light went out of the universe. The death of Sanguineous was not just the death of a Primarch. It was the death of hope itself. On the command deck, even the most fervent sons of Horus were silent. They had witnessed a sacrilege so profound it momentarily stunned even their corrupted souls. Horus emerged from his throne room sometime later, dragging the broken, wingless corpse of his brother. He threw it onto the command deck floor before us, a bloody, ruined testament to his victory. "The angel has fallen," Horus announced, his voice echoing with the power of victorious gods. "Let the corpse emperor see what becomes of his favorites. Let all of Terra see there is no hope. There is only me." I looked at the broken body of the most perfect being ever created. I looked at the triumphant face of the monster who had killed him. And in that moment, I knew the last fragile part of my soul that had clung to the old ideals shriveled up and died. There were no gods of justice. There were no angels of mercy. There was only power and the will to wield it. That night, I did not write in my journal. I simply opened it to a new page and pressed my bloody thumbprint onto the parchment. No words could capture what I had seen. Only a stain would suffice. The stain of the angel's fall. The stain of our collective sin. The final door was now open. The Emperor was next. The death of Sanguineous hung over the vengeful spirit like a pall of sacred ash. The ship, for a brief crystalline moment, was silent. The demonic whispers stilled. The groaning of tortured metal ceased. It was a silence of profound cosmic significance, as if the universe itself had drawn a sharp, horrified breath. We had passed a point of no return, so absolute that even the ruinous powers paused to admire their handiwork. The perfect son was dead, murdered by his brother. Nothing would ever be the same. Horus stood over the broken body, his chest heaving not with exertion, but with the influx of absolute power. The act of killing Sanguineous, the one being whose purity could have been his redemption, had been the final sacrifice that completed his apotheosis. The last vestiges of the Lupercal were gone. What remained was a conduit, a living vessel for the combined might of the Pantheon. His form seemed to swell. the shadows in the command deck twisting and bowing towards him as if he were a black sun. He kicked the angel's corpse aside, a gesture of such ultimate, blasphemous contempt that it broke the silence. Now, his voice was the grinding of galaxies, a sound that promised an end to all things. Now, we finish it. The order went out. The full hellish might of the traitor fleet focused into a single, concentrated lance of energy aimed at the last, failing void shield over the Imperial Palace's inner sanctum. The Iron Warrior's calculations, the Death Guard's despair, the Emperor's children's ecstatic violence, it all culminated in this one cataclysmic strike. The shield, already strained to its limit, flickered, screamed with the sound of tearing reality, and died. A path was open. A teleportation corridor, unstable and wreathed in lightning, was punched through the palace's defenses, directly to the Emperor's throne room. It was a tunnel of fire and blood, a blasphemous birth canal through which the end of the world would be delivered. Horus turned. His gaze, pools of molten amber, swimming in a sea of absolute black, swept the command deck. It fell upon me. You. The word was a command that rooted me to the spot. Remembrancer, you will come. You will witness the final truth. You will record the death of a god and the birth of an age. It was not a request. It was a sentence. Two of his Justaran Terminators, their armor now encrusted with demonic sigils and weeping rust, grabbed me by the arms. My pictor was thrust into my hands. I was a prisoner being led to my own execution, and my final duty was to chronicle the firing squad. The teleportation was an agony beyond any I had known. It was not a disassembly and reassembly of atoms. It was being pulled through the raw, screaming stuff of the warp itself. I felt a million demonic fingers clawing at my soul, tasting my fear, my despair, my tiny, flickering spark of defiance. I saw visions of the palace's history, its construction, its glory, its inevitable fall, all playing out at once in a screaming montage of fire and blood. We rematerialized in a place that defied description. It was a throne room, but it was also an engine, a nexus of impossible power. The air crackled with golden light, a desperate, noble energy that fought a losing war against the cloying, multicolored darkness we had brought with us. The scale was vast, a cathedral designed for beings the size of titans. And at its heart, upon a throne of machinery and agony, sat the master of mankind. He was not a man. He was not a king. He was a concept given form, a bastion, a final shining lighthouse in a galaxy drowned in night. His presence was a physical pressure, a golden warmth that sought to scour away the corruption we carried. He was clad in simple golden armor, but his power radiated from within, a psychic inferno that held back the howling madness of the warp. And he was wounded, terribly so, maintaining the Astronomicon, fighting 1,000 psychic battles across the galaxy, holding the fabric of reality together with his bare will. It had cost him. He was a glorious, radiant sun, but one on the verge of a supernova. Before him, scattered and broken, lay the bodies of his custodian guard. The 10,000, the finest warriors ever created, had died to the last man to buy their master these final moments. Their golden armor was scorched and shattered, their bodies hewn apart by traitorous blades and demonic claws. Horus took a step forward, his bulk dwarfing even the colossal scale of the room. The two powers, gold and black, clashed in the center of the chamber, causing the air to ripple and distort. "Father," Horus's voice was a mockery of the word, a sneer-given sound. "I have come home." The Emperor's head lifted. I saw his face then, and it haunts me still. There was no anger there, no hatred, only an infinite tragic sorrow. A grief so profound it could have drowned stars. "My son," the Emperor's voice was not a sound. It was a thought placed directly into the mind of every living being in the room. "They have shown you a poison, Horus. They have fed your pride and resentment until you became this vessel for their hunger. This is not ascension. This is slavery to powers that would devour all you sought to build." "I build nothing," Horus roared. "I only tear down. I will tear down your palace, your Imperium, your pathetic, lying dream. I will unmake your history and write a new one in the blood of this world." He raised Worldbreaker, the daemon mace pulsing with an energy that hurt my soul to look upon. The battle that followed was not a fight. It was a cataclysm. Horus was a maelstrom of raw, chaotic power, every blow backed by the fury of the warp. The Emperor was precision, a surgeon's blade of incandescent will, parrying, dodging, striking with impossible speed. I was forced to record it, my picture capturing the blinding flashes of light, the shock waves of force that could level mountains. The Emperor's sword cut into Horus's armor, each wound screaming with the voices of the damned. Worldbreaker slammed into the Emperor's frame, the sound of a bell tolling the end of the world. Horus was winning. The Emperor was diminished, his power stretched too thin. A blow from Worldbreaker shattered the Emperor's armor. Another broke his leg. He fell to one knee, his light flickering. Horus stood over him, triumphant. "See, Father, see the truth? Your light fails." He raised Worldbreaker for the final, killing blow. The Emperor looked at me, his gaze filled with bottomless sorrow, and placed a pure thought in my mind. See the man, not the god. I saw a flicker in Horus's eyes, a trapped fragment of the noble Warmaster, terrified and pleading. A figure in battered, blood-stained power armor interposed himself between them. A space marine of no known legion, his face a mask of simple, unyielding loyalty. He took the full force of Worldbreaker, his body utterly annihilated. The distraction lasted less than a second, but it was enough. The Emperor's sorrow vanished, replaced by a resolve of terrible, final beauty. His sword flashed, a perfect incandescent thrust that pierced Horus's armor, demonic flesh, and the very core of his being. Horus froze. The darkness shuddered. The demonic chorus screamed in agony. "Father," he whispered, his voice broken and small. The Emperor twisted the blade. A pure white light erupted from within Horus, the last light of his soul, expelling the Chaos Gods in a multicolored firestorm. A shockwave threw me from the Justaeron's grip. My head struck hard, and the world dissolved into pain and darkness. The last thing I saw before oblivion was the Emperor standing over the dissolving corpse of his son, his own body broken and bleeding, his light guttering like a candle in the wind. He had won. He had saved humanity, but at a terrible price. The dream was dead. The age of reason was over. All that was left was the long, slow, grim struggle for survival. The war was over. The long, dark age of the Imperium had begun. And I, Siren Valerius, was the only soul left alive who had seen the truth of it.